Ms. Langalis,
Here.
Ms. Wells,
Here.
Ms. Tabachnik,
Here.
Mr. Weiss,
Here.
Mr. Rushak,
Here.
Ms. Jordan Byron,
Present.
Mr. Rowena,
Here.
Mr. Williams,
Present.
Mr. Cantor.
Here.
I think Mr. Shulman's last.
Here. Okay, purpose of this meeting is public hearing 2023-19R/M, Planning and Zoning Commission zoning text amendment for a complete rewrite of the zoning regulations and map amendment for complete rezoning of the entire city. Let me explain how these hearings are conducted. Mr. Kleppen will give a very brief description of the rewrite. Otherwise, frankly, we'd be here all evening. Once he has done that, we will open the meeting up for public comment. We don't place any time constraints on how long you can speak, but as a courtesy to us and to the other folks who are here, we ask that you be as concise as possible, while also making certain that you've covered all the points that are important to you. I say that because each person only has one opportunity to speak. And that will carry over to tomorrow. So people who have spoken this evening will not be permitted to speak again tomorrow. We also ask that simply keep your language polite. Okay, understand that some of the issues involved in such a large undertaking may cause a good deal of emotion. We understand and appreciate that, but ask please that you keep yourselves under control. For those of you who have submitted letters to us, the letters are already in the record. It's not necessary to reread those letters. But if you wish to comment, that's perfectly all right. We will, depending on how late this goes, excuse me, we'll in all likelihood take about a 10-minute break at about 9 o'clock or so, and then continue the meeting. And again, depending on how many more people wish to speak, we'll choose a time to end the meeting that will give everyone an opportunity to speak between the two evenings. As you know, there will be a second public hearing that will mirror this one tomorrow evening, also beginning at 6 o'clock in this room. From our perspective, that is the members of the commission, we're here to listen to what you have to say. Keep that in mind when you're testifying. You know, someone who speaks for 15 or 20 minutes, there's a point at which it becomes difficult to hear what you're saying. And that's why I suggest brevity. But again, it's brevity that permits you to say everything that's important to you. But we are here to listen. This isn't a conversation back and forth. We will be discussing what we've heard this evening at our meetings next week, which will also be open to the public, but at which only the commissioners will be talking. We'll be determining what to do with these new regulations, and new map that we have in front of us. Pardon me?
What are the dates of those meetings?
Those meetings are going to be December 13th and December 14th. With that, we have one letter that by regulation, we're obligated to read into the record. So I'm going to ask our secretary, J.J. Byron, to read that letter.
Good evening. This letter is dated December the 5th, 2023. It is addressed to the Norfolk Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Steve Clippin. This letter is from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. It is dated December the 5th, 2023. It is addressed to the Norfolk Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Stephen Kleppen, Director of Planning and Zoning Office at 125 East Street, Norwalk, Connecticut, 06851. The subject of this letter is a Connecticut Deep LWRD comments on proposed comprehensive amendments to the Norwalk zoning regulations. Dear Commission members, thank you for the opportunity to review and comment on the above noted citywide comprehensive rezoning, which was received by the Land and Water Resource Division, known as LWRD, of the Department of Energy Environmental Protection, DEEP, on October 31st, 2023, with subsequent revisions and corrections received thereafter. Under Section 22A, 104, open paren E, close paren, of the Connecticut's general statutes, DEEP is responsible for reviewing zoning amendments for consistency with the policies of Section 22A-92 and the criteria of Section 22A-102, open paren small b, of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act. And we offer the following comments. As background, this latest zoning submittal follows a recent plan of conservation and development, also known as POCD, amendment to implement the industrial waterfront land use plan, which focuses on the harbor. LWRD provided comments to the commission dated September 21st, 2023, which outlined public safety concerns associated with potentially increasing residential density in flood-prone areas, while simultaneously encouraging less preservation and enhancement of active and future water-dependent uses, especially within the MC zone along Water Street. And they have a comment there, see LWRD comments attached. We are pleased that the resolution to adopt the POCD amendment in September put a pause at this time on plans to eliminate or rezone Water Street's marine commercial zone until the city has determined the appropriate solution for an ongoing flooding issue along Water Street. It is also encouraging the resolution included a strong statement to preserve locations of the water-dependent uses generally, and especially in the Water Street, Soho, and East Norwalk areas. I think they meant Sono. Okay, Deep LWRD staff has continued to coordinate with city staff on the zoning revisions proposal, and we appreciated their responsiveness to several of our coastal management and climate change considerations and their willingness to meet us on November the 14th, 2023, to clarify components of the zoning amendments. Many of these zoning changes are extremely positive from a coastal management perspective, including increasing base flood elevation, evacuation access in some zones, elevation, requirements to include an additional 2 feet of freeboard, open paren versus 1 foot, close paren, the requirements of dry evacuation access in some zones, improve allowance of water-dependent uses in several zones, and increase stormwater management, decreases in impervious coverage, and low-impact development incentives. We appreciate this additional coordination and believe this has led to enhancements that align very well with the CCMA. Our remaining concerns focus on increasing residential density, allowing in flood-prone areas. especially as we are experiencing increased climate change-induced flooding, along prioritizing and preservation and the future allowance of water-dependent use. Careful consideration of these issues is necessary to ensure consistency with the CCMA and the city's municipal coastal program, harbor management plan, and hazardous mitigation policies. Okay, so now we have a subject line, coastal flood hazard issues. CGS section 22A-92B, open close 2, and then open paren F, requires coastal municipalities to manage coastal hazard areas so as to ensure that development proceeds in such a manner that hazards to life and property are minimized. Emphasis is added. This CCMA policy goes beyond Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is known as FEMA, construction practices and requires municipal land to use commissions to make decisions to minimize threats to life, in addition to threats to property. And so they act to see attached Connecticut Coastal Management Plan fact sheet. It is important to recognize that the same flooding concerns outlined in our September 21st, 2023 PLCD amendment. Am I reading too fast?
No.
Okay, sorry. Comments regarding Water Street and the harbor area are also relevant to currently proposed rezoning for areas within the coastal boundary, given the prevalence of the 100-year FEMA flood zone in this area. See FEMA harbor map below. In light of climate change effects, such as more intense storms and more frequent flooding inundations, any zoning changes within these flood-prone areas that put more people at increased risk and risk from flood by allowing high density and or new residential use beyond the allowed under the current zoning and are not generally recommended. And further could be additional burden upon the city. I'm gonna read that last part again. Could very well be an additional burden upon the city. Specifically, we understand that there are 4 properties within the harbor area for which an increased residential density would be allowed. 3 of these are located in the Commerce Street and are currently zoned as industrial number 1, which is heavy industrial, and allow no residential use. And at Connecticut DOT property located on Goldstein Place, just outside the Walk Bridge, that is currently zoned as a neighborhood business with a residential density of 1 per 1,650 square feet of lot area. These 4 properties are all proposed to be zoned as CD-4W, which will allow an increased multifamily residential density of 1 unit per 500 square feet of lot area, which represents the densest residential zoning proposed within the city. Although we support the proposed requirement of dry access for these sites, we recommend that provisions for how this would be accomplished, such as incorporation of special provisions or criteria, be specifically defined, especially as Commerce Street properties back up to the railroad, which is a barrier to access. Ideally, prior to adopting the increases in residential density or overlay zones that would potentially increase public safety risks associated with flooding in the coastal hazard areas, the city is encouraged to first complete the resilience planning occurring with the state grant fund. This effort would help inform how best to protect or manage these flood-prone lands. Subject line, water-dependent use. CGS section 22A-92B, open paren 1, close paren A, requires that use in the coastal boundary be managed to give highest priority and preference to water-dependent use and facilities in shorefront areas. This is emphasized. CGS section 22A-93, open paren 17, close paren defines adverse impacts on future water-dependent development opportunities and adverse impacts on future water-dependent development activities to include, bullet point, locating a non-water dependent use at a site that is physically suited for a water dependent use for which there is a reasonable demand, and, next bullet point, replacement of water dependent use with non-water dependent use. While active water-dependent use will continue to be permitted under the proposed zoning amendments and historical and current use illustrates their suitability, it is anticipated that these use may be readily and easily outcompeted economically by high-density residential development if allowed as proposed. This would be unfortunate reality in many communities in this recent decade. We again acknowledge and appreciate the city's recent and broad POCD resolution to preserve water-dependent use now and into the future. It is our understanding that the proposed zoning amendments will increase the number of parcels where water-dependent use are permitted. Open paren SD-MC, CD-3W, and CD-4W, close paren. And we fully support this proposed expansion. However, we are concerned that the new water-dependent use in these zones will be outcompeted by more profitable, high-density residential and commercial use. We therefore recommend additional measures to preserve, promote, and enhance future water-dependent use to be incorporated into the proposed zoning amendments to avoid CCMA-defined adverse impacts cited above. See attached WD2 fact sheet for more information. For example, WDUs could be allowed by right, while residence use could be subject to special permit consideration. And restrictions could be incorporated to clearly promote only active water-dependent use within a certain distance of the water closest to the waterfront, in addition to the public access that is already built in. We hope these comments prove useful to the commission, and we look forward to continuing our discussion and welcome the opportunity to meet again to ensure our mutual interest in ensuring public safety and supporting water-dependent use. Please contact me or Mary Blank at my staff, and she gives her email address, with any questions you may have. Signed, Brian P. Thomas.
Thank you, JJ. Two other quick comments. Could I ask that you mute your phones, please, so as not to disturb one another. And finally, there is Spanish translation available should anyone require it. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Steve Kleppen for a brief summary of exactly what it is we're attempting to do here.
Sure. And just to give everybody a heads up on the process, we do have a sign-in sheet here. I will be, and there's more on the table if you haven't had a chance to sign in yet. I will call off names of the people who have written down their names for speaking, and then we'll kind of go back and forth between people who want to speak who are virtual versus the folks in the room. As the chairman said, we started this process probably 2.5 years ago. One of the recommendations of the citywide plan, and one of the things that I first recognized when I got to the city in 2016, was that the zoning regulations were woefully out of date, poorly structured, just not a user-friendly document, and kind of things done on a piecemeal basis. When projects came in, zoning changes were made as opposed to having a comprehensive plan where the city lays out a vision and puts out the guidance documents on how they want to see it developed. So we went through the process of securing a consultant who has been undertaking that rewrite for the past 2 years. You know, we released the draft in April of 2023, so a few months ago, 6 months ago. We had public hearings back in June. The commission has been meeting pretty much weekly since sometime in the summer to go through changes, recommendations, and edits. I think, you know, the documents come a long way in terms of what the public wanted to see, the concerns raised, and kind of making it line up a little better with how things should go in the future. On November 21st, which was about 2 weeks ago, we did have a kind of a draft preview of tonight's hearing, kind of give the public a little sense of what changes were made since the April release of the draft, with the idea of hoping that would answer some of the questions without having to do a full presentation tonight, to make it a little brief. Before we turn it over to you guys to tell us what you think, we want to just show you the webpage where all the information is housed. So We've spent most of our day kind of fielding comments and questions and letters. We've gotten a bunch of letters in and emails in. So what Brian is showing you now is the P and Z page. If you click on the main banner there, zoning regulations update, it takes you to this page. And if you scroll down a little bit down the page after the opening kind of paragraph, you'll see all the standards and the different articles of the regulations are broken down. There's also individually put there is the use table, which is kind of one particularly popular item. So that use table there is important to note. That's up to date with all the changes the commission has kind of blessed to this point in time. Whereas if you were to click on any of the individual articles, you'll see red line edits in there. So the red line edits are the things that the commission has agreed to, but we just haven't put into the code yet because they have not taken a formal vote. That will occur next week, hopefully. Scrolling further down on that page, you have the two maps. One is a static PDF. The other one is an interactive map, where the interactive map allows you to enter in the property address. You can click on that and it will tell you what the current zone is of your property, what the rules are associated with that, as well as will tell you what the proposed zone is and what all the rules associated with that are. Further down that page are some information sheets we put together during the initial phase of the rewrite. And kind of more importantly for where we are now, at the bottom of the page are the comments received. So the very last two areas where it talks about public comments and staff memorandums, those hopefully are pretty up to date. I think we got a couple of late ones this afternoon that haven't been posted yet. But the idea is as we're getting those in, we're posting those comments and refreshing the page, and staff is responding to those comments in an Excel spreadsheet. We had done a lot of pretty intricate and detailed memorandums, but at this stage in the game, I think it's going to be hard to put those together. So we are responding to each comment within the spreadsheet and sharing that with the public and the commission so they can be informed prior to them making a decision, as I mentioned, probably next week. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if you wish, I can start calling names off and we can get the hearing started. Okay. First person listed for sign-in was Caroline Ward. If you could just state your name and address, please.
My name is Caroline Ward. I live at 6 Park Lane in Norwalk in Harborview. It's my first time testifying, so if I'm out of protocol at any point, just let me know so I can get back on track because I would like my testimony heard today. First of all, I want to thank the commission for all the work you've done and for hearing us this evening. Harborview, as you know, is in a flood zone. People here live in flood zones as well, so I'm particularly focused on that area of the new codes. And I'm just going to talk to my situation and what the current code does to me, where if I have to make a repair on my house, such as my roof I need to replace my roof or a tree were to fall, of what that means to me, and also based on the new code, what this means to me. If I understand the codes correctly, I do believe I understand the present ones fully. I think I understand the new proposed ones. Based on the existing codes, I have $43,000 to spend on my house before I'd have to lift it. So if I need a new roof or something else tragic happens, I could be in some trouble if it costs more than $43,000. I've lived in Norwalk more than 20 years before the rising oceans, climate change, and flooding was as much of a concern as it is today. Under the new proposed codes, at 50%, I would, and if you go back to 10 years back, if I understand it, you may want to go back to the appraised value of 10 years ago. And at 50% rule, I'd have $12,000 to spend before I'd have to lift. At 25%, I don't have a dime to spend. I'm at negative $20,000. If you go to 2018's last appraisal, at 50%, as I said, at 2018, I have $43,000 to spend. If you go down to 25%, I'm already under. I have under by $5,000. I would have to lift my home if something tragic occurs, or I have to update a bathroom or something happens that requires me to pull a permit. I did have my house quoted to lift after Sandy. The cost was $273,000 to lift a house that had an appraised value in 2015, the structure itself at $131,000. So much more than the actual appraised value of the structure. I was also told by an appraiser, by lifting my home only increases the value 10%. But again, this is 10 years ago. As I see it, I have three options. If at any point I would be caused to lift if I needed to repair a roof or do any other repairs that go beyond even currently $43,000 under the new proposed code. I have to spend a penny on my house. I either don't do the repair, putting my house at a possible danger. I don't pull a permit, which is not what I would do, or I have to sell my home, a home I've lived in Norwalk for over 20 years. What I see this doing for those who may have to sell is you're driving out residents. For the current residents who've been here long-term and maybe even some shorter term, for those who can afford these kind of costs, $250,000 10 years ago to lift a house that isn't even worth that, just to repair a roof or to do some other repair that requires a permit. So I don't know if there's any other options. I can't ask questions, is what I kind of learned today. But the question would be to y'all, what are my options beyond that, so I can stay in the home I've lived in and that I love, and I do want to stay in for as long as I can. I also want to point out that the NFIP, Norwalk is already more strict than that with its current proposal. NFIP, you don't look backwards. It's on a project basis. They don't look at previous permits pulled. So my numbers do include previous permits before I moved in that were pulled on the house. And it's based on 50%, which is currently where Norwalk is right now. And as I understand it, we are looking at going down to 25%. I appreciate needing to lift those homes. I live in a home that was flooded in Sandy, and I appreciate this, but it's also, I don't want to have to leave my home, and I take it upon myself to make that choice by buying the appropriate insurance for the next time this could possibly happen. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you.
Linnell Jones.
My name is Linnell Jones. My address is 10 Point Road. My husband and I have lived in Norwalk since 1986, over 35 years. After listening to the first speaker, I just want to mention the flood mitigation assistance, which is something that is available from FEMA to residents. And it is something that information is available at the state level. I will follow up with that particular neighbor as well. You may remember me. I'm the one from Wilson Point, also on the coast, South Norwalk, who made a public comment at the East Norwalk 1 Cemetery Street public hearing. And I addressed 2 issues that mattered to me. Issue number 1, the importance of harbor management review. Attorney Blank represented to you, commissioners, that the Harbor Management Commission had no issue with 1 cemetery, when that wasn't the whole truth. The Harbor Management Commission was waiting for additional information, which Attorney Blank said he would provide, but never provided the commission. You approved 1 cemetery without the approval of the Harbor Management Commission. They sent a letter, and your chair learned about the 2/3 vote needed to override a harbor letter of no support. Attorney Blank knew the Harbor Management Commission's questions. The meeting's on video, and it's also on video that Attorney Blank said he would answer, but he never did. Harbor waited, you voted. In this situation, however, Harbor Management Commission comments matter to the public, and the Harbor Commission has held meetings about this. Have you seen comments from Harbor Commission yet? Isn't this reason enough to postpone any vote until next year? Harbor Commission comments matter to the public, they matter to me. My second issue is handicap parking. Director Kleppen dismissed me in front of the commission and on the website, saying handicap parking is building code, not zoning. Well, maybe like drainage, it's also planning. But like the Clean Water Act, the Fair Housing Act is a federal law that should be very clear as you rezone, specifically dropping parking requirements. The letter you got from the Fair Housing Norwalk Committee refers to the Fair Housing Act. Do you know why? My suggestion was not even considered and likely not even shared with you, which I hope makes at least one of you question what it was and why my concern was dismissed. This is another reason to postpone your vote, particularly as I see staff continue to drop parking requirements. No question, you have been busy, and it has taken a lot of time to follow your meetings and public hearing. The POCD language change for the waterfront was a very important change, since the POCD directs the city's budget. This is where it became clear that P&Z was guiding you to approve increasing density in the flood zone because they said that is what the Common Council told them to do. Informed by who? Not Circa, the federally funded, or ACOM, the federally funded consultants that Norwalk did not invite, but who invited themselves to Norwalk. Not informed? According to Deep in the Western COG, if you really read what they wrote, prominent studies from years ago, prior to current concerns about rising sea levels and enhanced storms, concluded that yes, there are economic benefits to be gained from increased floodplain development in the short term, but in the long term, government expenditure dramatically increases. This is well known. This trade-off is mentioned in Deep's letter, and resiliency planning is now mandated. So where's the concept of resiliency in these regs? Is this why so little of what Resilient Connecticut and Circa shared with city leaders about zoning for resiliency has been shared with you? Do you understand why life cycle cost analysis are required and when? I want to trust the process, but I cannot even begin to think about trust until this vote gives the public and you time to digest all relevant information and separate good information from self-interest. I want to trust in city leaders, particularly with something this important. But floods are acts of man. Floods are acts of God. Flood losses are acts of man. Politics doesn't change the physics of water. Full disclosure, my FOI request to the mayor's office in P&Z went to a 4-hour FOI hearing and awaits outcome. FOI is one of the few ways the public has to hold city leaders accountable today. Trust with verification, a phrase from the 80s, is still relevant today. If you do not want to make this public hearing a salacious story, all you have to do is give yourselves and the public time to read, review, and digest all the recent changes, letters, and comments that haven't even come yet from our Harbor Management Commission, and the letter that was just read by Deep. Why the rush? I want to trust in your process, but I do not. Why rush closing this, pretending the public has had enough time to consider everything when you know you have not heard or considered all that Circa has told city leaders about planning for rising sea levels and zoning for resilience? You haven't even seen Harbor's comments, really considered what Deep wrote, why it was written that way, or considered what your zoning changes and new parking requirements, or lack thereof, mean for a handicapped or elderly person in need of assistance walking. If you believe you are balancing economic benefits against climate change, reread the Deep letter and read the Western COG POCD, which requires life cycle cost analysis, particularly for projects in the flood zone taking federal money. I want to trust city leaders, attorneys, and staff have properly informed you so you can make fair decisions. But I do not. I listened to staff ask you to approve language, and someone asked what SLR language even meant, thinking it was an acronym like LID. Twisting sustainability and resilience, turning sustainability into a point system to increase density is not the concept of resiliency and zoning. And why hasn't staff shared with you what the state and feds have shared with them? The consultant SLR was brought in for municipal capacity building, and knowing something about them, I spoke with Noah until Noah explained to me that the city of Norwalk told him he could no longer speak with me. Why? We all want to trust in our city leaders. We all want to trust that you, volunteers who have taken an oath, care about public health and safety, not just if buildings are left standing when the flood, hurricane, heavy rains come. And tonight, that is only possible if you realize you need more time, insight to make an informed and fair decision. The public needs more time. Think before you vote. Please find the courage, character, and intelligence to question why a vote in 2024 would be so different than a rushed 2023 vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Beth Sullivan.
Hello, and I wrote your letter, which I assume you all got. Okay, so I'm not going to repeat all that, but I do have a lot to say. I'll say it as quickly as I can, but I think it's really important. I live at 42 Harborview Avenue. I've lived there for 33 years. It started off as an AE flood zone, and now it's a velocity, so I've seen it all. I've been in real estate for 14 years. I sold 25 homes in a flood zone, from $300,000 house on Warren Street to a $3 million home in Pine Point. So I'm very, very, very familiar with substantial improvement. And that's all I'm going to speak about, because I think the effect that this new proposed regulation is going to have on a lot of people is just devastating. So anyways, I'm going to stick to my notes because I didn't want to go off on a tangent. So here I go. I really do want to thank you for the time and the energy you've put into this so far. I know I used to sit 5 or 6 years on the Conservation Commission, and we weren't asked to do a total 800-page rewrite. So I know the last months have been treacherous for you, and I appreciate all the time and attention. And I think it's difficult, it was for me at times, to understand the complexity of every single issue that you're thrown at. We don't, anyway, so my one thing I would really like to say is that I hope, like the last speaker, that you spend some additional time understanding the effect of these proposed changes. And I'm only talking about SI. So I apologize for coming to the table as late as I am. I don't know, life got in the way, so here I am, ready or not. So everyone would agree that our current substantial improvement regs are outdated, crazy. So, but here you are in a position to improve them. Now, and you don't have to do it in a vacuum. We live in a town surrounded by other coastal towns that have already been working with an improved substantial improvement definition. And I'll talk about that later. But these proposed regulations are affecting me, my neighbors, my friends, and clients. And I'd like to give you some information that you may or may not have. And I'd also like to clarify some information that wasn't correct in your October 25th meeting. I've watched that meeting like 4 or 5 times. So anyways, I have also given you a petition that my business partner has put together, and there's over 350 signatures that are petitioning this proposed regulation. Now, this email only went out on 8 days ago on 11/27, and I certainly don't have emails for everybody in the city. So I did the best I could and asked everybody to forward it to their group of people that may be interested. And so with that's a huge number. And I think we would only get more if we had more time and blah, blah, blah. So please understand also that most people who live in these flood zones were totally unaware of the changes proposed. So, we need more time. I can't imagine anyone living in a flood zone that would agree with these proposed changes. Even if your house is flood compliant, you want your neighbors to be able to maintain their houses. And I have a spreadsheet that I just took. I didn't delve into. I took the last 20 sales in Harborview, Village Creek, Harbor Shores, and Shorefront Park, and I'm giving you the spreadsheet for you to take a look at because I think it's a real eye opener. Like my neighbor just talked about before me, that, you know, a sales price, and then what we're talking about is a 2016, well, I guess we're going to 20, what's the math on here? Sorry, 2024. So 10 years back would be 2014. So they don't have those in the public field card. So I use 2016, but that's the exact same appraised value. And so if you take 25% of the appraised value and you take away the permits, the total substantial improvement budget is impossible to work with going forward. And these are houses that range from a sales price of 300 to 1.8. And there's just not enough budget to do maintenance and repairs, never mind improvements. So the things we can agree on, we all need flood regulations to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program that provides flood insurance. We also realize that anyone who owns a home in a flood zone would love to be FEMA compliant, but unfortunately, at a cost of a minimum of $150,000 to lift it, it's out of reach for many, and these homeowners still need to maintain their properties. Therefore, they need a budget that will provide reasonable maintenance. So just to keep this simple, you all know there's only three components in the SI calculation: market value, number two, the percent of the market value, and the reset period. So as Caroline mentioned, why does Norwalk have to be more stringent or restrictive than FEMA itself? And you all, I won't repeat what theirs is because you all know it, but I think it was really important that, I think this was in your email that I sent you, but FEMA itself says, why was 50% chosen as a substantial improvement threshold? And so just briefly, you have it all, and I'm sure everybody here knows, but basically it's a happy medium. It says that. It says you have to, here it is, I'm just gonna read it. Sorry, I'm gonna take a minute. Okay, the 50% threshold was chosen as a compromise between two extremes. One extreme would be to prohibit all investments in existing non-conforming buildings that do not meet the minimum NFIP requirements. The other extreme would be to allow buildings in the flood hazard to be improved in any fashion without regard to flood risk. In the first scenario, there's the potential for causing hardship to those who have flood hazard areas without knowing the risk because those buildings were constructed before areas designated as flood prone. Those individuals would not be able to improve their buildings as damage or age contributes to deterioration. The second scenario provides no mechanism, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, the threshold of 50% is a compromise at a halfway point and conforms to similar building code and zoning standards that also use a 50%. So, and why do we need to be more restrictive than neighboring towns? Darien uses a current market value of 50% and a reset 3 years. Westport does the current market value of 50%, reset 5 years. 10 years is an arbitrary and irrelevant number and no reflection to the current market value. I don't understand why 50% doesn't make sense to Norwalk when it makes sense to FEMA. The SI budget is used for all repairs and maintenance. That's paint, demo, furnace, windows, roof, blah, blah, blah. You know, material and labor has skyrocketed in the last 10 years. There's been a 52% increase in the average sales price for a single family home in Norwalk. And FEMA only insures you up to $250,000. I mean, you have to take those things into consideration when you consider this SI budget. You know, roof replacement, $20,000. Window replacement for a $1,500 square foot house. I just asked somebody I know, $35,000 to $40,000. So, you know, Steve, you mentioned in the October 25th meeting that Norwalk is probably the strictest in the state when it comes to SI, and it will continue to be with the proposed regulations. For those of you not familiar with what goes into a lift, utilities were raised, basements filled, evacuation to get steel beams under the house, the actual lift, you build the foundation, including floodlights, you gotta lower the house, You need more insulation. You have to reconnect the utilities, great property, steps to get out, and you have to move out. So you have a rental for at least 6 months. That's why it costs so much. So as regards to the 1025 meeting, I really am concerned about some of the information, and I did reach out to Tammy Moldonado. There were twice when she talked that, I think somebody asked, what happens to a house that doesn't have a permit pulled in the last 10 years? What value do you use? And she incorrectly stated current market value. None of this regulations use current market value, the proposed ones that P&Z has offered. It's going back 10 years, which is irrelevant. It's just not appropriate. It doesn't pertain to what the value is currently. And that was just, Tammy said there was some point in time that I don't know, that there was, you might be able to help me out, Steve, but you can't talk, which is a little unfortunate, but that I guess maybe there was something that was proposed earlier than what is now proposed, that may have been true, but it's not true as of October 25th or today. You know, it also stated that the city has 200 properties elevated and that they didn't want to lose the momentum. Well, let me tell you, because I know this firsthand. I live in a community and I see and I sell. I see who raises. And most of the houses happened after Sandy. The federal government was very generous to give out money because we were living in, you know, people couldn't live in their homes. So they gave money. Well, guess what? That money's dried up. And I know, Anna, you were really great in bringing up the whole resource part of October 25th meeting, but that money is gone. FEMA doesn't have it. So, you know, it's nice to think about, but, you know, so that was one reason why a lot of houses got raised. And then many times it takes new ownership. A person who bought a home in these neighborhood 30 years ago, they don't necessarily have $150, $250 to raise the house. They'd love to, but who's writing the check? They'd love to be FEMA compliant, but you know, they might have bought their house for $300,000, I don't know, 30 years ago or whatever, but they don't have those kind of funds. So usually it's a new owner that comes in, and what they do is to protect their investment, they come in and they factor in that raise money to buy the property. So it's not somebody who's just coming in to buy the structure. They have allotted, you know, money in their purchase to, you know, raise the house because they can afford it. So, Steve, you also said in that meeting that if you could come out with a better out, that you would have considered it. Well, FEMA has figured it out. You know, they said current market value, 50% and a 3 to 5 year reset. It's reasonable. Everybody does it. In Darien, I sold a house recently. The woman bought it. It was non-FEMA compliant. It also had a whole bunch of other issues. But anyways, she is now like a year into it after hiring an architect and blah, 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 blah. She's lifting it because she wants to protect her investment. So it kind of just naturally happens. So with these regulations, I really feel like you're tying the hands of people that will be unable to do repairs and they can't live. So these homes are people's major assets. What do you propose they do? Nick, you asked something about, you know, these changes and how they play out negatively and what's the downside. And Tammy Moldonado replied, there's never a downside to flood regulations. Well, this in case, there's a lot of options that would provide what you guys need. We all want people safe. We all want our investment safe, but you can't just say, well, lift, because people don't have that kind of money and they have to maintain their house. In that October 25th meeting, somebody said, I think it was Alexis, who said, you know, in one 10-year period, you could put on your roof, and the next 10-year period, you could put on windows. It take you 20 years to do 2 minor improvements? That's ridiculous. You know, Mike, you mentioned something about increasing the quality of life and safety concerns. I wasn't exactly sure what you were getting at, but you mentioned plumbing and electrical rewriting. All that's added to the substantial improvement number. So blah, blah, blah. So back to, I'm a bit concerned at the end of the October 25th meeting that the straw poll resulted in 6-2 and 2 abstaining. I think at this point, and I think you'll probably hear from a couple other people, that you have enough reason and information to say you need to look at this in more detail. And what do these proposed changes do to restrict home ownership in improving and repairing their home? That's the crux of the situation. It's not like somebody doesn't want to raise their house. It's just a financial burden. So, and we all, you know, we are where we are. We are having rising tides, but, you know, what are you going to do? Say, okay, all you people move out so all the rich people can come in? Like, don't do that. Don't do that. So, I think what we're suggesting to you is what all the other towns are doing. Current market value, 50%. Pick a reset, 3 to 5 years. Make yourself happy. But, you know, I know you're deliberating for 2 days in December, and I understand it's a busy time of year, and I don't want you to labor over the December time, but that means that I think you have to put off this decision until January. You need to go outside of staff to get some of this information. I talked to the guys down in planning and zoning in Darien. Do they still have flood compliant people raising? Yes, of course they do. This won't inhibit people to throw in another $800,000 to their house to be non-FEMA compliant, because they're gonna wanna lift it at that point. I've had that experience with many clients. They come to the point where they buy it, they live in it, they need to do so many things because now they've lived in it for a couple of years, realize what they do. So the numbers get big, and that's when they lift. So anyways, I could go on, that's enough. I think you get my point, but I really hope you take this to heart because it's really important. I've lived in Harborview for 33 years, and Sandy slammed us, and so happy that that grant money was out there to help a lot of people. And you can tell who took the grant money because they made you go even higher. And I built my house, I don't know, 13 years ago in the same spot that I bought it in 1990. And I followed those rules and regulations, but I'm not FEMA compliant because the rules and regulations wouldn't, I actually wanted to go higher than City Hall would let me. So, you know, there's a lot of different non-FEMA compliant homes too. Some are really low, some are not so low. So you really have to understand all the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Hennessy.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, thank you very much. For the record, I'm William Hennessy, and I'd like to begin by thanking staff and the commission for all your hard work in this. This is not an easy task, and I think you got most things very right. I'm here to talk on behalf of one client of ours, the Weburn Country Club, to an issue that you've only heard about tonight, and that is flood resiliency and the substantial compliance rule, the substantial improvement rule, excuse me. I won't repeat the many good points made by earlier speakers here. I would just point out that the Norwalk rules currently exist is far more stringent than any surrounding town. And the research done by the earlier speakers is quite right. The surrounding towns tend to use a much shorter look-back period, between 3 and 5 years, and it's a rolling look-back period. And the rule is that you cannot put more than 50% of the value of the structure in any look-back period. It tends to regulate what happens to non-compliant buildings. it doesn't really reward you for being non-compliant, but it allows you to invest in your property and make improvements that do increase the resiliency, even if they don't get you all the way to where you would need to be completely compliant with the FEMA reg. It is a tool that's used to allow for folks to do something, even if it doesn't result in full compliance. Now, the other thing that your current regs have, and I don't think anybody has pointed it out, and I'm going to look to both Brian and Steve to help me if I've got this wrong, but as I go through your current code, you also have sort of a safety valve for folks, and that is the ability to obtain a variance from the flood reg. And it looks to me like your new code would eliminate that. So you would change the rules slightly, but frankly, you wouldn't be doing a whole lot of, you wouldn't be creating more flexibility. You'd be creating a new sort of standard date with a shorter look back period, but a smaller amount you could invest. And it looks like you would also take away the ability for those who have a true hardship to obtain a variance and still make some kind of improvement. I think that's, I just don't think it's wise. I don't think it helps people achieve the goal of investing in their home, living in their home, or commercial property for that matter, and still improving it as time goes by. And it creates a bar, frankly, that many properties, many homeowners can't achieve, and many property owners would find it uneconomical or unwise to try to. I don't think it advances a goal of creating a more sustainable environment. If the objective here is to make the building environment in Norwalk as FEMA compliant as possible and as safe as possible for people, I think creating a bar too high discourages people from doing that and maybe makes it impossible for people to doing that. This may be a case where, you know, striving for the perfect is the enemy of the good, and creating more flexibility is good. We would urge you to look around at your surrounding communities and apply something like a 3 or a 5 year look back and a 50% SI cap. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen Christopher.
Good evening, I'm Stephen Christopher, owner of 151, 153 Eli Avenue. Since 2018, I've been working on the improvement of Whistleville, namely Mulvoy Street and Eli Avenue, and many positive changes have been made. As the final zoning plan for Norwalk is put into place, I wanted to suggest 2 items. One, that the proposed CD4 zoning be extended across the street to include 6 Mulvoy, 8 Mulvoy, and 3 Eli. So as you round Hendry Street to Mulvoy and Eli, these properties can be brought to their highest and best use and form an appropriate entrance to the commercial section of historic Whistleville. 2, that 151, 153 Eli be included in the CD3 zone just across the street. This will allow for future improvement and create a southern gateway from the commercial district of Eli into the residential neighborhood of Laura Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jack Pavia.
Hi, my name is Jack Pavia, and I live and grew up at 32 Vanderbilt Avenue. I want to first thank the Planning and Zoning Commission for holding this public hearing on a zoning rewrite that will be absolutely critical for the future residents of Norwalk. I'm a 19-year-old college student who has grown up in Norwalk for all of my life. I'm a proud graduate of Brian McMahon High School, and I feel pretty confident in saying I'll be the youngest person to testify tonight. So I want to speak to the struggles of the housing market for my generation and what Norwalk can do to remedy it. We have a housing crisis in America, and it's particularly prevalent in Connecticut. According to our U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, we have the tightest housing supply in the nation, something he called our single biggest economic liability. He blames the crisis on local rules that prevent the building of housing. Put plainly, he's correct. If my generation is looking to rent a home in Connecticut, they're faced with the reality that only 2.1% of Connecticut's rental housing is available, the lowest vacancy rate in any state in the country. A renter in Connecticut must earn $28 an hour to comfortably afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Connecticut, double the minimum wage. The crisis is compounding. In August of 2019, the median sale price of a home in Norwalk was $413,000. Fast forward just 4 years to August of 2023, and the median price was $655,000, an increase of nearly 40%. How is my generation going to afford this? Am I and people like me just going to be entirely priced out of the state we grew up in? How are poorer communities in Norwalk, an outsized number of which are people of color, going to afford this? Are we going to sit idly by while they're increasingly priced out of their communities? What we need to do is build more affordable, transit-oriented, sustainable housing. We need the ending of parking mandates and subsidies to have more effective land use. One single parking spot in downtown Norwalk is estimated to be worth $10,000. We need more housing specifically surrounding the bus network and Metro North stops to encourage the use of environmentally conscious public transit. We need to rethink what it means to be build an equitable city for all, including hearing from all communities in Norwalk of all socioeconomic backgrounds and ages. I support the proposed zoning changes and encourage the Planning and Zoning Commission to undertake additional changes necessary to deal with our state's housing crisis and secure a brighter future for all of Norwalk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Margaret Egan.
Hi, good evening. My name is Margaret Egan. I'm an asset manager with Clarion Partners, and I represent the ownership of Merit 7. I do not live in Norwalk. I live in neighboring Westchester County. Thank you to Mr. Kleppen and the commission for all the work you've done on the new code. And thank you specifically to Mr. Kleppen and staff for speaking with the Merit 7 team on a few occasions, specifically about our concerns. For those who are not familiar with Merit 7, we are a 1.6 million square foot office park on Main Avenue. 6 buildings, started building in 1979 through 2000. And we've been an integral part of the city's tax base since we were delivered 44 years ago. Current ownership has been involved with the asset since the mid-90s. I personally have worked on this asset for over 20 years. I started when I was a teenager. Just kidding, some levity. So we have management and ownership take great pride in Merit 7. I don't know if anybody here works on the complex. Over our ownership, we've invested prudently to be a good corporate citizen and to be one of the best-in-class office environments in Fairfield County. So as you know, demand for office space in Norwalk has changed over time and has declined precipitously since COVID, the COVID pandemic and the embrace of work from home dynamics. Merit 7 is not immune to the declining demand. We're struggling significantly with existing tenants, less demand and attracting new tenants despite spending a lot of money pre-COVID and since COVID on amenities and tenant engagement. And we want to work with the city to ensure that our site continues to be a hub of activity for office tenants and potentially other uses and an asset to the tax roll. Ownership at Merit 7 has been engaging with Steve and the planning and zoning staff since August regarding how the proposed updated zoning code may be applied to the park. The primary focus of the discussions has been ensuring appropriate flexibility in the case of change of use and/or redevelopment for Merit 7. There are several aspects of the code that, as currently written, do not readily apply to Merit 7. The primary concern, we have 2 concerns related to the code, is the new code excludes large multifamily buildings on minor or major arterials and state roads in the CD4 zone have to have commercial or retail at the base of the building for the tenants in those buildings and for the public. The issue with Merit 7 is Merit 7 is not really on grade. It's above Main Avenue, and the retail will not be readily visible to passersby and probably would be very hard to lease and would be suboptimal for the tenants and the public. And to alleviate this concern, we had talked with Steve about potentially having an overlay district similar to the Merit 7 Station Village overlay. Staff has been receptive to that idea, either pulling it into that overlay or a new overlay, but has suggested doing so after the zoning code is adopted. Ownership respectfully requests that the extension of this overlay or the creation of a new overlay is done in concert with the proposed zoning code, because absent this, ownership will be in limbo relative to options and be forced to delay efforts to revitalize Merit 7 at a critical time when we have significant amounts of tenants rolling over and some buildings where we could potentially have them fully vacant in a couple of years. Furthermore, ownership's apprehensive about some of the sustainability initiatives that are included in the proposed zoning code, specifically the requirements for sustainable roofing zones, green roofs, solar panels, and EV charging stations. The requirement to install green roof or solar panels across a minimum of 90% of the roof areas on new or renovated buildings over 5,000 square feet is problematic relative to the HVAC equipment that's on the building, some of which are required for sustainability initiatives. Additionally, the requirement for 50% of EV charging stations on all parking spaces is not only cost prohibitive, but in instances can be problematic relative to electrical capacity. So ownership respectfully requests that more study and engagement with stakeholders and professionals be undertaken before these sustainability measures are codified. The adoption of these measures as currently proposed makes repurposing existing buildings and the pursuit of new projects cost prohibitive. In the case of office to residential conversions and/or multifamily housing, the curtailing of these projects will further exacerbate the housing affordability concerns that were just mentioned prior to my speech that are top of mind for all of Norwalk. So Merit 7 stands ready to provide any assistance in this regard, and we look forward to further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa Feinberg.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name's Lisa Feinberg. I am a partner with Carmody, Torrance, Sandock, and Hennessy. I'm here tonight on behalf of one of our clients, Argent Ventures, the new owner of Manresa Island. I want to echo my partner's comment from earlier and just thank you all for your time and energy. I know this has been quite an endeavor. I will do my best to be brief. When this process first started, Argent was still in the contract negotiation process with NRG. And as you all know, in any real estate transaction, there's always risk. And given this site's power plant use, it certainly has its fair share of risk. But the zoning rewrite kind of threw another element into that equation. When Argent began due diligence on the site, there was a certain set of rules, and then the new rules, the new regulations were poised to kind of change everything that they knew. So as we explained in some of our earlier correspondence, we met with city officials back in December of 2022 to discuss Argent's concept for the property. They wanted to focus on creating a unique coastal residential neighborhood showcasing resiliency, ecological restoration, and communal open space. But in order to achieve that goal, Argent needed certain modifications to the regs. And the idea was that they would sort of tweak the current zone, the B residence zone, which would have only permitted traditional subdivision. The plan was to model the redevelopment on the conservation development standards, which allow for the clustering of homes and significant conservation area that Argent was looking to achieve. After reviewing the regs that came out previously, I think CD3S and now CD1S, we were concerned that it wouldn't be possible for Argent to develop the site in the sensitive manner that they envisioned. So we began working with Mr. Kleppen and Mr. Baker on an overlay zone that would provide the flexibility needed for this very unique site. We submitted our suggested proposed text on November 21st, And on November 30th, we met with a group of neighbors representing the various neighborhood groups surrounding Manresa to discuss the development concept to come in the future, as well as this text. Everyone in attendance was very supportive. It was a really great meeting. We were clear that it was the first of many meetings. It's going to be a very long process for Argent to redevelop the site. As you all know, because this is an overlay zone that would ultimately be subject to a master plan and special permit approval process, as we've suggested it. It does not vest Argent with anything as of right. However, landing the overlay zone now will provide Argent with some sense of certainty regarding its plans for the future and the confidence to continue its efforts in this very extensive redevelopment process. It also provides the neighbors with some sense of security since it limits the density and commits to significant conservation on the site. So for those reasons, we hope that you will adopt the overlay that we've proposed for Manresa, and thank you for your time.
Ben Hampeter?
Thank you.
Good evening to the commission, and thank you again for all your ongoing hard work. It's been a big effort. My name is Ben Handpeter. I live at 14 Haviland Place in South Norwalk. As a disclosure for tonight, I'm an alternate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, but tonight I'm just speaking as a private citizen, and I won't be touching on anything that impacts ZBA business. I am an organizer for Sustainable Streets Norwalk, which is a group that advocates in part for land use policies that will help alleviate Norwalk's housing crisis and promote neighborhood walkability. Sustainable Streets submitted a letter to P&Z to encourage the reduction or elimination of parking minimums as part of the zoning update. That's already been submitted and is available on the website as a matter of public record, so I won't try to summarize that here, but I did want to at least highlight a couple points and add a few of my comments to it. The main point that I'd like to make tonight is that reducing or eliminating minimum parking requirements will help Norwalk build more of the housing that we need to make sure that it remains affordable for everyone. The additional costs imposed by both the existing and proposed parking requirements increase housing costs by increasing construction costs, and it reduces the variety of housing that Norwalk has by squeezing out smaller projects. As an aside, by squeezing out smaller projects, that leaves us with a more limited, aesthetic of projects. We see a lot of the sort of big apartment buildings that many people aren't huge fans of. I don't personally share that dislike, but I think a lot of people no matter what your opinion is, would like to see a greater variety and sizes of housing when it is built. Parking requirements are a financial imposition on builders that passes costs on to residents, and it also locks in future traffic congestion, which is in contradiction with the increasingly popular choice to live either car-free or car-light. In many American cities of all sizes and in all regions of the country have fully eliminated parking minimums. We often hear in Norwalk when we debate this that Norwalk has some unique attribute that makes it uniquely unable to live without the excessive parking that we currently have and still require today. But I'd invite you to think about whether Norwalk is really so different than some of the following cities that have successfully eliminated their parking requirements in recent years. And I've got a little list here that includes Raleigh, North Carolina, Eugene, Oregon, Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, Culver City, California, Olympia, Washington, Gainesville, Florida, Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's so many more, but that's just a little sampler. And some that are closer to home include Buffalo, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Hudson, New York, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. I don't believe that there's any intrinsic property of Norwalk that prevents us from taking the type of bold action that we need to address our struggles with housing affordability, traffic congestion, environmental sustainability, and fiscal stability. Reducing or eliminating parking requirements is a simple action that will pay huge dividends for all residents. I ask that you please consider this request as you move forward to vote on the final regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Chenard?
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, it was not working for me. I would like to just comment and ask the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve the new updated zoning regulations. I would also like to add. Hello?
Mr. Shinard, can we please have
Yes.
your,
Oh, sorry. Paul Chenard, 36 Windsor Place, Norwalk, Connecticut. I apologize, sir.
thank you.
So back to what I was saying. I would like the Planning and Zoning Commission to please approve the new zoning regulations. I think they're a good compromise, even though I would like to see some more townhouses in the single family homes that are closer to zone allowed. I would also like to see either the reduction or the elimination of parking minimums as well in the downtown area, so SoNo and stuff like that. Will allow for greater variety of housing, reduced cost in housing, which is a big part of the housing affordability crunch. We know how housing affordability is a major issue within our state. We know there's a rising homeless population because of housing costs. And I don't want to see, say, Connecticut be somewhere like Texas where people are sleeping out in fields and stuff like that because housing is just so astronomical. You know, a person can't even afford a small studio apartment. So I would like to ask that the Planning and Zoning please approve the zoning regulations, maybe upzone a little bit if possible, and to also either eliminate or reduce parking minimums within the city. Thank you. Good evening.
Abdul Khan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abdul Ghafar Khan. I came to this country in 1975 and I'm and that's why I bought a house in 1982 at 8 Cardi Street, now East Norwalk, and I'm still living over there. I love this area very much and still living over there. But instantly, it's still meaning a little busy and crowded, but still I love the area. And the reason I'm here because the zoning department is planning to change the zone from AC to CD4 multiple family zone from 1 to 2 family, which will make the area very crowded and very busy. So I would appreciate if the zoning department and give priority to local residents in this area's opinion in this decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to apologize for the last name ahead of time, but Jillian Sakovitz, I hope.
You nailed it. Yes, Jillian Sakovitz. I live in East Norwalk. We moved here about 3 years ago, my husband and I, and we're a young family. We're part of the Marvin Beach Association. I help out with some of the events here in East Norwalk, and we live on 1 Alden Avenue. Just some of our concerns are we spent, like a lot of people, your life savings on a house. And then we moved in needing a new roof, and we tried to go about it in the right way. We got a permit and we're kind of told, hey, why'd you go get a permit? Now you've put yourself behind the 8 ball a little bit with these types of rules. And then we got nervous as new homeowners that we went about it the right thing and we improved our house that was built in 1926. My husband's a teacher. He started a Spanish English language program at the East Norwalk Library that he did for a year as a volunteer. And we love being involved in East Norwalk, but I am 38 weeks pregnant and about to have our first child. Our house is a little small and we hope we're able to continue to be a part of this community. But when we look at the renovation laws and if we need more space eventually or more improvements to what's a 100-year-old home, we don't want to have to leave Norwalk because we can't afford to improve our home. So that's all. I just wanted to say, I think I speak for a lot of young families. We've had 9 young families and 7 pregnant people this year on Alden Avenue in East Norwalk. And I think I speak for a lot of us when we want to be able to keep our houses nice and renovate them as needed. But with the current rules, we feel like we wouldn't be people in the ballpark who would be able to raise our homes or anything like that, but we don't want to leave the area, and we love it and we want to be involved. But with rules like this, I think you're opening it up to people who come in, raise the house, and they're here 4 months a year. And I think you're going to price out normal, good, involved people with the current way that it's set up and what's being proposed. So thank you.
Thank you.
There's nobody else with their hand raised, so I'm going to go off paper, but if there is anybody participating virtually, the raise your hand feature is at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and we'll call you in order. Next one is Diane Keefe.
My name is Diane Keefe. I live at 249 Chestnut Hill Road in Norwalk. I've lived here for 32 years. Jack Pavia and the previous speaker spoke my mind for context, and also Ben. I'm going to suggest 10 things to improve affordability, inclusivity, and sustainability in the regs. The first one is to provide for tiny homes. Tiny homes are less than 500 square feet, and some individuals choose to live in those, either as rentals or for sale. I think they would be a great exception, showing that Norwalk is ready to be innovative and welcoming to sustainable housing. And they tend to cost between $20,000 and $100,000. So they are very much more affordable for young people to be able to get a handle on owning something here. Number two, allow higher building height, 5 to 6 stories in the Wall Street area, as long as crosswalks, bike lanes, bike racks, and traffic lights allow for safe travel by bicyclists and pedestrians to make the area less car dominant. Design the area mindful that there is a possible train station in the area in the future, since there was a train station there previously. Number three, allow for co-housing and condo conversion of homes larger than 2,000 square feet into 1 to 4 family, either condo or rental units, to enable owner-occupied single-family residences with owners who are over 65 years old to convert those residences in Norwalk to avoid the financial pressure to move to retirement communities in the South, which I have seen many of my older friends move away from Norwalk because of the property tax burden. This is a way to solve it. Number four, maintain the requirement for solar installations and stormwater management in all developments of any size. And with respect to the Merit 7 situation, I would hope that if we would make any compromise on solar installations on the roof, it would be only to accommodate heat pump infrastructure instead of conventional air conditioning. Number five, require all new rental or condo developments to disclose expected monthly heating and electric bills to prospective renters or home buyers, which is a state law for affordable housing now. But I think it would be really wise for Norwalk to be able to require that purchasers be aware of what the energy costs of what they're signing on to would be. Number six, require air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps for heating and cooling, and solar systems for electric in all new developments over 15,000 square feet. I think you have it for 25,000 square feet, but my concern was that developers might go slightly under that 25,000 square foot hurdle in order to avoid these requirements. Number seven, provide for variances for residential development above commercial buildings and greater allow building heights within 1/8 of a mile of any large grocery store located in Norwalk to encourage walkability and include improved walking and cycling infrastructure from the building site to the grocery store. Include current locations of Stop and Shop, ShopRite, Stu Leonard's, C-Town, IGA, Wegmans, and Whole Foods. Do not include any store that doesn't sell fresh food and vegetables, such as Walmart, in giving them any advantages. Number eight, require when a new development is proposed that the developer sets up a ground floor security office open 24/7 or runs a 24-hour convenience store or both to encourage street safety for those walking at night in the neighborhood. The new buildings developed in South Norwalk in recent years lack this community amenity to prevent street crime and cultivate a feeling of safety in urban settings for women and other vulnerable people, including the elderly. In exchange for decreased parking requirements for developers of Merit 7 and others, they should commit to fund Wheels to You or similar shuttle services for tenants and the public to South Norwalk and Merit train stations. Number 9, require more public access to the Norwalk River be provided, and that signage is prominently displayed for any new development along riverfront or waterfront. We don't need more private, almost hidden riverside walkways like those behind buildings on East Avenue, for example. Number 10, related to East Avenue, near the Green and along East Avenue north of 95, there are many residences, medical office buildings, and City Hall, yet there are no easily accessible restaurants or grocery stores. Encouraging a Trader Joe's or another grocery store to locate there would help reduce congestion from local residents driving to shop for food in other neighborhoods. Commercial buildings around the Green have lots of vacancy. Perhaps allowing a small grocery store like Seatown or IGA would enhance the livability of that neighborhood. There's a hodgepodge of architectural styles in some of the older commercial buildings near the Green. Perhaps the PNC could approve a more architecturally consistent New England green design to remedy some of the design crimes of the past. Thank you for all the work you've done, and I look forward to the result.
Thank you.
Alana Sakovitz.
Hi, yeah. I guess my last name also says I'm the sister of the previous speaker, Jillian Sakovitz. I live on 3 Alden Avenue in East Norwalk. We both moved here with the intention of longevity and being able to raise our families here close together. We think the current plan does not reflect reality in assessing home values for the purposes of constructions or improvements. I think it's important to be able to preserve the ability of residents to remain here and invest in their properties long term. We're a young family. We have a 10-week-old baby, and our ability to stay in this house, in this neighborhood, is going to depend and hinge entirely on these regulations at some point, whether that's a matter of 1 or 2 or 3 years. I think the current plan would deter people from making renovations that could fix potentially hazardous problems, like needing a new porch, like needing a new roof, simple fixes that could be absolutely necessary, whether it's the safety of your house, your household members, young children, that you just might not be able to do if you need a permit and you're afraid that it's going to create this whole new cap on your improvements or just fixing existing hazards. I think the current regulations would favor replacing current residents with potentially only wealthy individuals who could afford to become FEMA compliant. And especially for younger families, it ultimately dissuades occupants from having an interest in investing in a community that they might not be a part of long-term or have a stake in if they see their time here as limited. Ultimately, this is detrimental to development. It could harm investments in schools, public resources, et cetera, when people don't see longevity as an option. And it's particularly nonsensical when neighboring towns with the same level of flood threats have much more favorable regulations. So that's just adding to, I know, a lot of similar points other people have touched on, but I know that's a concern for a lot of people in this neck of the woods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanner Thompson.
Hello, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I want to also thank you, as a lot of people have, for all the work. I know it's like 7 months in at this point since we saw the draft for the first time. And I know that you've been meeting very frequently, I think weekly, if not bi-weekly, to review these. So I know that's a ton of time that you invested in this, and I appreciate it. I want to concur with the other speakers who have gone before me, talking about how the regulations are moving us in the right direction by creating incrementally more opportunities for housing development, adding supply to our housing market that is incredibly supply constrained. I also want to echo what they said about parking minimums, and I want to dive into that just a little bit and talk about Trader Joe's. Actually, Diane mentioned Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's is very beloved. It's a very beloved brand, But there's one problem that a lot of people complain about when it comes to Trader Joe's, and that is that their parking lots are always very small. People complain about this because sometimes you can't find parking there. Sometimes it's, there's only a couple spots available. But despite that, Trader Joe's is still a very beloved brand, in large part because their prices are low. And one of the ways that they keep their prices low is by not acquiring a ton of real estate. And they do that by finding places where they can put in locations that don't require a ton of parking. That's another reason that their stores are very small, is because in most places, like in Norwalk, at least in the proposed regs, the amount of parking required for a store is proportional directly to the amount of square footage in that store. So Trader Joe's keeps their stores small so that they can keep their parking small, keep their costs down, and they pass those savings on in the form of cheap groceries that everybody loves. Obviously, there's other reasons people love Trader Joe's too, but I wanted to call that out because that is a through line through a lot of the issues that we're seeing with housing today. I invite you to read the letter that I and several other members of Sustainable Streets drafted, where we go into more detail about the history of parking requirements, the impacts that they have on housing affordability, housing construction. The short summary, Jack mentioned that parking is valued at $10,000 a spot. That's just the land value, actually. If you look at estimates for the value of downtown land in the Norwalk, Bridgeport, Stamford metro area, and you break that down, divide that into the area of a parking spot, it comes out to about $10,000 for just the land value. But if you're building a parking structure, that's 2 or 3 times that, somewhere between 20 and 30,000 from last year's estimates in terms of the cost to construct a parking structure. I want to raise the example of, it was brought before the Zoning Commission a few years ago, of 64 South Main. That's currently the Clark showroom. There was a proposal brought in front of the Zoning Commission to rebuild that property and add, I think, 26 units of housing on top. And at the time, Chair Lou Schulman asked, why aren't you including more housing in this? Because it was in the Sono transit-oriented district, where we're trying to get more housing because it's right next to the train station. It's also right next to Washington Street. It's like the most walkable, dense part of Norwalk, the part of Norwalk that would be most conducive to living without a car. And the answer was, we can't build more because it wouldn't pencil out, because we'd have to build a parking structure. And nowadays, if you fast forward 4 years and you go down to 64 South Main, there are 0 units of housing because the project never got built. Obviously, construction costs increased in the interim, but I think that just makes the constraints imposed by parking requirements that much more relevant, because we see projects not penciling out anymore, and thus housing goes unbuilt. So obviously there's the cost of providing the parking when the project does get built, but I think that what needs more attention is the implicit cost of all of the projects that go unbuilt because the requirements are so onerous. We live in a city where people lived here, white people lived here for 400 years. We've had people there long before that, but like our street grid was laid out long before we had automobiles. And so we have dense downtowns with narrow streets that evolved before people were driving everywhere. And so they are very conducive to walking, to biking, to taking public transit. Norwalk's first big population boom happened around the railroad. And as a result, we have areas like South Norwalk, like Wall Street, that are very conducive to dense, walkable neighborhoods, places where people don't need to own a car in order to live a happy, successful, fulfilling life. And that was the entire city of Norwalk about 100 years ago, before people started buying and relying on cars. And a big reason that we can't embrace that more fully now that it's so important that we drive down our carbon emissions to contribute to sustainability, that's important because we have this housing crisis and we need to add more housing to the housing market. There's no better place to do that than places where people can most easily live without a car, and that is our urban core. So our invitation to you in our letter, we provide more rationale for this, but our invitation is to reduce parking requirements specifically in the urban core of Norwalk. We could go about that by increasing the reductions that are currently in the code that are based on a radius around transit stations. I think there's also a case to be made that could be done per zone, right? We have these zone designations that essentially are saying this is where we want to concentrate our development, and along with that, we'll go walkability. Along with that, we'll go increase transit service. Ideally, we would be doing this hand in hand with transit planning. I hope that all of you know that the transit district is currently undergoing their comprehensive operational analysis, which may result in a complete redesign of the bus network. And I think it's very fortuitous that that's happening at the same time as the zoning rewrite, because transit planning and land use planning, when done in conjunction, can be very powerful, because you can situate your new development next to transit, you can situate your transit next to new development, and drive way down the need for additional car infrastructure and the traffic that's then added to our already burdened streets, our already congested streets. So this is all to say, please take a look at our letter. Please consider reducing the parking requirements, especially in the urban core of Norwalk. It will have benefits for housing affordability, but will also have benefits for the environment. There's, as people referenced earlier, there are requirements in the zoning code, in the proposed code, for sustainability purposes that I think are good goals, things like EV chargers, things like solar panels on buildings, but ultimately those things, while they serve sustainability purposes, also serve to increase the cost of development, which contributes to our housing affordability crisis. We have other tools at our disposal that will be both a net good for sustainability and a net good for housing affordability, and those are parking requirements. If we reduce those, we can reduce our reliance on cars as a means of transportation. That's good for sustainability. It's good for housing affordability. So I hope that you'll take that into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rich Bonifant, and if there's anybody virtually that wants to speak again, raise your hand button is at the bottom of the screen.
Good evening, Rich Bonifant, 17 Park Hill Avenue. It might not be too popular at the end of this, but I've been to many workshops and presentations and hearings. So these are my observations, comments, and maybe suggestions. First, I thought the plan of, the POCD, I think it was a phony document. All the comments about density never made it into the report. People asked to not cram so much into the city, and none of that made it into the document. There's no population goal, and so what you end up with what is uncontrolled growth. Without getting too personal here, I feel Ms. Wells should give up her vote and give it to an alternate. She's never attended one of these meetings in person and never faced the crowd, but I'll let it go at that. I think you should require dog walking areas on site for these developments. Attorneys throw it back at you saying it's not required, so we're not going to do it. Waypoint just says use Matthews Park they tried putting a dog walking area within Waypoint. No one's picking up, so the management just tells them go over to Matthews Park and just use that and don't pick up there either. Right? When that issue came up, when the master plan for the parks master plan came up before the Common Council, the director was asked about this. You know, what's the plan on enforcement? And he just rolled his eyes and said, "Oh man, then I got to do work to enforce it, like give out tickets and go to court or something." So he wasn't in the mood to deal with any kind of enforcement here. Another topic here. Please don't water down what you would consider a minor change after an approval. Seems like the attorneys are trying to play you. You would approve a large development on Glover Avenue after a public hearing. Well, a few months later, the attorney comes back and says, "Oh, remember that retail? We're not doing it." So much for walkability. Now you got 5,000 apartments saying you can't walk anywhere to get a quart of milk. Now on the corridors like Westport Avenue, Main Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, you're trying to make the frontage more attractive by putting the parking in the rear. Well, that can be perceived as a safety issue and certainly a burden on the abutting neighbors in the residential zones behind these parking lots. When a project gets bonus units by promising amenities like public space, and they'll get a few bonus units out of that. But it came up on the one by the train station with Attorney Blank. Like, what happens when it gets out of hand with like loud drunks and litter. And the attorney said, well, if it gets out of hand, I'm going to just close the public space. What does that mean? And I'll do the same thing at the mill pond, he said. Well, what does that mean? You got to throw 3 or 4 people out of their apartments because you just lost the bonus that came with the amenities? For neighborhoods slated to go to 2-family, how much leeway or authority does the zoning board of appeals have in waiving your requirements? If I said, I don't have a driver's license and I don't have a car, but I want to split my house into a duplex, can the zoning board of appeals listen to my story and say, okay, we're going to waive the 4 driveway spaces requirement? Will they be able to do that? So I don't think you're going to solve the affordability issue by trashing the city with 2-family zones, up zones, or saturating the neighborhoods with more rental apartments. It didn't happen with the last 10,000 units that you've been approving. All we got was traffic congestion and overcrowded neighborhoods. But besides that, thank you so much for putting all this time into this. Mr. Clinton, you must have ice running through your veins after 2 years of this coming at you. But I just appreciate the time you people put into it. Thank you.
Palladino? Again, if you're home, virtual, *9 if by phone, or raise your hand at the bottom of the screen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm down here. I was at the last.
Can you just name and address, please?
Oh, my name is Vic Palladino, 7 Muriel Street, Norwalk, Connecticut. Lifelong Norwalk resident, for better or worse. And in my opinion, the last several years it's gotten worse. I've enumerated what my thoughts were on that at the last meeting. All you have to do is try to drive someplace or even walk. And God forbid you ride a bicycle because you ignore the street laws. In any event, actually, using a euphemism like Julius Caesar here, they came to praise Caesar and not bury him. The last meeting I was down here I was vehemently opposed to your attempt to bastardize the single-family zones in Norwalk. And I enumerated those reasons, which are obvious to most people who have lived here, as opposed to those who want to live here. And so actually, I'm here to praise you people for backing off, like I said, the bastardization of the single-family zones, which I found to be outrageous as being a lifelong Norwalk resident. So I commend you for that. And hopefully you don't go back that way. Where I am, I didn't know if I was going to speak, so I got to get my thoughts together here. Again, I appreciate you on that, but where I'm not appreciating is, and I think it's generational, because I've heard people here today who want to live in Norwalk or live in Connecticut. Hey, I want to live in Malibu. I can't afford it. I've adapted. I've lived with it in my 75 years. So the people who want to cram more people, like, not everybody can live in America. So hopefully don't go that route. You reverse direction once and try to make some middle of the road accommodations. And I appreciate that. And how that happened, I don't know. Maybe you finally listen to us, the bones who live here. With that being said, like I said, it's generational from what I've heard today, not the last couple of meetings several months ago. Without being repetitious, I'm through talking. And a little contrary to that last statement that not everybody can live in Norwalk, I at least wish everybody a good holiday season. And hopefully we won't be back here, we, you, me, some of the other people, rehashing the battle lines again. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Brian O'Neill.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks. I'll echo what everyone else said. Thanks for your time and work on all this. I'm a resident of 6 Roland Avenue, part of the Marvin Beach contingent that's here. I'm actually the president of the Marvin Beach Association. I'm speaking to you in my individual capacity, but I certainly am very well vested and tied to what a lot of the concerns are of my neighborhood. So a lot of what I will have to say, certainly I think is shared by members of my community. I'm part of I saw Alana and Jillian speak before. They're part of our association, and my wife and I are part of the group of folks in the neighborhood that have recently had children. Our son Charlie's 2.5 years old. We moved here in 2017, and we sort of stumbled upon, we bought into 2017, and we stumbled upon Marvin Beach. It's a really special place. The character of the houses, I think Jillian and Alana mentioned their houses are over 100 years old. You see a lot of that in our neighborhood. And the reason I mention all of that, and by the way, the neighborhood association is very close-knit. We do a lot of things that are very neighborly oriented. We have events that go back over 100 years in that neighborhood. And the reason I mention all of this is that it seems to me that the substantial improvement regulation would be a very big concern in terms of preserving that character and the richness of the community that includes the fact that we have a lot of families that want to live there and a lot of hardworking folks that love where they live and want to preserve the character of their homes. And when we hear about some of the different examples of what the substantial improvement budget would do, and I think about what is the FEMA's purpose, right? These regulations are supposed to, as you said, support and promote health and safety, right? They're supposed to promote the preservation of some of these buildings. Well, when we talk about some of the different improvements that people have mentioned that would be cost prohibitive under this regulation, you got to think about it in terms of promoting those goals. If people can't fix their roofs, that could lead to leaks, that could lead to major structural damage. They can't replace their windows. Well, that's a problem for the environment. It's going to be less energy efficient and certainly expose the inside of the house to more external hazards. You can't replace, the framing around the window. You're going to lead to mold. My son's window above his room, we're going to be replacing it very soon and doing some improvements on our home. It's rotted around the frame, and that led to some leaking down, and then we have a little mold forming that's going to have to be remediated as part of that project. I can't imagine that anyone actually wants people to be able to be forced to live in that sort of condition. That's injurious to their health. That's injurious to the safety and certainly the integrity of the building. And so I understand and I appreciate that maybe everything that's being said here is not exactly accurate. You guys are the masters of the information. And I know that you're taking this seriously and considering everything that everyone says. But what I would say is that as you guys go back to those regulations and you think about how can we do these regulations that don't prevent people from being able to make those sort of improvements? Because what I think will be the practical effect, we talk about the idea that, you impose these regulations, people will lift their houses sooner. I think the reality is that you impose regulations like this, at least certainly as I understand them, and again, they may be inaccurate, you're going to force people into the position, I think one of my friends over here mentioned this, where they decide to either live in substandard conditions or they stay there and they sell their home, or they live in those substandard conditions long enough to the point where eventually what ends up happening is, and this isn't sort of speculation, I've seen it multiple times in our neighborhood in the 5 years that I've been, or 6 years that I've been here. It'll get knocked down, very big, extravagant building that's oversized for the lot will get put in its place. And the likelihood of the folks that would be moving into those scenarios, not into those sorts of structures, and I'm not disparaging anybody, everybody has a right to live in the sort of house of their dreams. But it's not likely to be the type of character that our neighborhood currently has. Now, I'll just leave on one other point because I saw a lot of information. I really appreciate you all posting a lot of stuff on the website. I actually, while we were here, finally saw a lot of this information and started to read it. One thing to consider, I mean, I take it that the coastal area management overlay is not something that applies to the substantial improvement rule. But man, when I see exemptions in that plan, which I assume applies to city projects, it seems like that would solve a lot of problems. One of them is that a single family dwelling, construction or alteration of 1,000 square feet or more, as long as it's 100 feet away from any coastal resources, or minor additions to existing buildings if more than 50 feet from coastal resources. Those are exemptions. And again, I don't know exactly what that applies to, but exemptions like that to be considered for the substantial improvement rule would sort of strike that balance, right? Allow us to do things that are necessary for upkeep of and maintenance of the home. And at the same time, you know, when you are trying to do something that is very big and broad in scope, that it is certainly, I think, appropriate to start saying it's time to raise your home and fill it. So it could strike that balance. And I just hope that you guys think about that as you consider some of these regulations, either some of the changes proposed or some of the exemptions that appear in other parts of the regulation. Because, you know, my wife and I share the same thing that Alana and Jillian said, and I know a lot of other folks did as well. I want Charlie to grow up here. I grew up in Trumbull, Connecticut. I fell in love with Norwalk. I fell in love with my neighborhood. We have visions of Charlie running around Marvin Beach with all the folks and babies that are coming there. I really want that to happen for myself, for everyone else as well, because I think it'll be a benefit to the city. So thank you again for your time, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
I believe Ms. Thompson and Ms. Smyrnitopoulos left, unless they snuck back in. Ms. Thompson and Smyrnitopoulos, I think they left. Liz Suchin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Good evening. My name is Liz Suchy. I'm a partner at Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy, and I appear before you tonight on behalf of Brian Terzian and his company, Terzian Trucking. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Kleppen, Mr. Baker, and the entire zoning staff for all of the time and effort that they dedicated to this Herculean task to rewrite the zoning regulations. They've answered questions, addressed concerns, met with property owners and other constituency groups, and then suggested revisions and modifications to this commission for consideration. My clients, including Norwalk Hospital, the Gardella family, LaJoy's, Marcus Partners, Merit 7, O&G, and Argent Ventures, all do appreciate their time and their effort. I would also like to commend this commission for the attention and time you have dedicated to it for the past 8 months. I'm here to summarize comments shared with you in writing in my letter of November 8th, relating to one specific section of the regulations, and that is section 1.21.2.b.7. It relates to non-conforming uses. I trust that my correspondence has been shared with you and you have had the time to consider its contents. We also received the staff's response, and while we appreciate their position, we respectfully disagree and ask you to reconsider our suggestions. In sum, in October 2022, this commission enacted changes to the zoning map relating to industrial properties, as you all probably will remember. As a result, several businesses were made legally non-conforming, including Mr. Terzian's on South Main and Woodward, among others. First, I request that this commission confirm during your deliberations that the non-conforming language under consideration will be applicable to all industrial property owners whose zoning classification was changed in October 2022, thereby making them legally non-conforming, and not just the I-1 zone that exists today, post-action of October 2022, as noted in the proposed regulations. I call this to your attention because it does seem somewhat conflicting and confusing, that one sentence, as to which properties would be able to avail themselves of the non-conforming clause. Second, the proposed language under consideration removed a very small three-letter word, not, and by doing so, altered the effect of the language that was adopted by this commission just 1 year ago, following input from affected industrial business owners and staff. The result of this modification is important, as it indicates that new technologies, products, and services, and the relocation of existing structures would be considered expansions of a non-conforming use, and such intensification is permissible by special permit. Those are to me seem internally inconsistent concepts. So I suggest to you that the combination of expansion and intensification in the same sentence, again, is internally inconsistent and contrary to established case law in Connecticut relating to nonconformities. Accordingly, I would request that you consider the comments raised in our letter of November 8th, and that the proposed language that you are contemplating adopting be modified to mirror the language adopted by this commission just last year. It is cleaner, less likely to be subject to differing interpretations and challenges, and reflects the input from industrial property owners who fought diligently to secure the change last year. Once again, thank you for your efforts tonight and throughout this entire process.
Thank you.
Jack Myers.
Hi there. My name is Jack Myers. I live at 3 Union Park South. I'm sure you are all very bored of being thanked by now, but thank you, Commission, for all your hard work on this zoning tonight. I would like to echo Ben Handpeter and Tanner Thompson in supporting further reduced parking requirements around the transit-oriented districts in Norwalk. I think it's a bit of an oxymoron to have a transit-oriented district and then have it shrouded in parking that prevents people from walking to their local train station or to the bus depot. And as a young person and currently a renter, I have to think about my future and my ability to invest in owning a home. And with the current stock of rental housing in Norwalk and other similar cities around the United States, it's an issue honestly everywhere. I have to think about putting money away in order to save up for that down payment and to be able to own my own home. And with the current rental prices and the lack of options for renters, I don't see a very optimistic future in owning a stake in Norwalk, personally.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's 7 signed up speakers. Do you want to take a break? It's a little after 8 o'clock now. If you want to.
I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. I had indicated we'd take a break at 9 o'clock, but I think this is fine. It's 8:03. Let's get back together at 8:15. Is it next on the list?
Sure. Jeff Nagelkirky? I'm sorry.
My name is Jeff Nagelkirk, 178 Flax Hill Road, C204. Let's try to speak briefly about 3 things that caught my attention. One was the Marine Commercial District. I actually worked there at one point in my career, and I just wanted to say a word about my thoughts about what direction that was going, both in the south part of the harbor and the north part of the harbor. A couple points about the bulk of the buildings and the view of the harbor. I didn't see that well addressed, and some just minor points about lighting and light pollution that you might consider to clarify in the rules. So in 1998, I came to Norwalk to work at 140 Water Street. This part of the Marine Commercial District, which I understand is more or less leaving alone at the moment. On the southern part, I guess the changes are more substantial in the northern part of the harbor. up above King Chemical. It gave me the opportunity to work in a tech business and light manufacturing in a Pleasant Harbor Marina district. It was attractive to me to come to Norwalk to live and work. It's exaggerating a little bit, but to get to my point, it's like a little tiny San Francisco Bay for local tech. PerkinElmer was a very large employer at that time in the 80s. And the man that I came to work for here owned the set of buildings on Water Street at 140. The family, I believe, still owns it. And he was the first vice president of PerkinElmer, but he was here and came here, much like I did, because he liked sailing. So much like California and San Francisco Bay, you have to look at the work-life balance. Not only do people need a place to live, but you need a place to work, and it's also nice and be enjoyable place to work, distractions, place to entertain clients, visitors, other people that you're working with. The harbor is very suitable to that. So when I saw the changes, which were moving in the Marine Commercial District more towards residential orientations, particularly high density at the top of the harbor, it just recalled that the 6 years or so that I spent, which was my first time in Connecticut, may not have been an opportunity for me if it was a high density residential area and not, you know, amiable to light manufacturing, engineering, or harbor related uses. So the history of that company went from 12 to 66 people before it was bought out, and the previous iteration in the same location had up to 250 employees. These were high-tech, computer software, engineers, optics people, assemblers, sales and service folks. It was a good employer along Water Street, which you may or may not have known about. In that same complex of buildings, there was at one point in time a very secretive defense contractor also doing high-tech work. There's been a variety of light manufacturing at that location, all of which I think provided a diversity of employment. And like I said, it was just made sense. You could entertain clients, you could go to the local yacht club. It was just a good mix of light industry and technology and harbor use. It's a little bit distant, I would agree, from a harbor use. So I guess I looked through the list of people that had petitioned, and one that struck me, although it wasn't a technology company, I look at the Divine Brothers, and so I wanted to be in support of their letter about their concern of the zoning change around them to high density residential when they're in, you know, the heavy transport and barge transport of other things. So as a user of the harbor, also a mooring user, a longtime boater, user of Rex Marine, Laura Cove, I saw with the city, I appreciated the city's efforts to get federal funding for dredging, but that was a combined effort. It's not just the marina owners, the yacht club owners, and the property owners along the harbor that wanted dredging. It's also the industrial uses at the top of the harbor. Divine Brothers are, you know, opposed to the zoning change, for example, and I'm sure some of their neighbors are as well. In order to get federal money and state money for dredging, it was necessary to have not only mooring users in the harbor and marinas and yacht clubs and property owners that wanted dredging out to the lighthouse and up to the top of the harbor. It was the combined uses and the DOT's support of heavy material hauling capability that barges have that are able to do the deep water dredging to the top of the harbor. And I think I agree with DEP's letter, which was a long read at the beginning, that if you change that to high density residential at the top of the harbor, sooner or later, the current owners and or their children or somebody will sell those properties and take advantage of, I believe it was a CD5 zoning at the top of the harbor. I'm not sure, but it was high density all the way around the top of the harbor. And most of that has been deep water dredged. And the other users of the harbor, we all need those commercial users as well in order to gather, as the city did on everybody's behalf, federal funding and state funding for dredging the harbor, which eventually will have to be done again. Plus, the bridge is being built at great expense to the public to allow commercial traffic to still get to the top of the harbor, which again would be kind of pointless, at least the bridge that's being built, if there is no commercial use at the top of the harbor. So I'm not opposed to changes to the commercial district. I'm just telling you that's how I came here. That's a little bit of history about how it has benefited the city. and how you could use it to do business development in ways which I don't see as being encouraged by making it high density residential, the general trend that that would be going to. Let's see. The bulk view, by having high density housing, which is most likely going to have a high story limit, I couldn't find the exact limits on the total number of stories. It's most likely going to block the view of the people on Harbor and Commercial or anybody that has property to the west of there. It's the same thing that the South Norwalk Transit District did to pretty much the entire west side of the harbor, and anybody that lived up on Sound View or Flax Hill or any other Golden Hill or any of the other, much of the harbor view was lost to that. That used to be in the city's plans, consideration for view and sight lines to the harbor. There were even used to be little bits about driving down, the street and still being able to glimpse harbor activities, or the tippy top of sails used to be in the plans. I don't see that anymore. I just see heavy emphasis on high density housing right up at the edge of the water, which basically closed off the entire western half of the harbor view. So you have an opportunity one more time on the northern part of the harbor, the remaining areas to be considered for rezoning, to take into consideration view and sight lines of property holders and future housing and other folks on the west side of the harbor. And lastly, the light pollution continues to get worse in the harbor and along the river, mostly due to the new development. Even the city's property, the police station, parking garage, all are pretty bad. Whether the standards were in place when that was done most recently and they're not being followed, or the net effect is it's just worse than expected even following the standards. I did look at the lighting standards at 4.3.17, the private lighting standards, and 4.3.17.B1, the private lighting types. And quite honestly, it didn't make sense to me. I understand that there's an intent there to have only down lighting and no sky lighting, or no lighting at 80 or 90 degrees coming out. Looks like the attempt, but it gets very confusing when it gets to the table of approved lighting types. For example, it says Cobra Head's not approved, but then all the examples it shows are kind of quaint things: Colonial Head, Coach Head, Acorn Head, all these other cute lighting styles. But to me, they all have like lenses and will have light 360 and at the eye level and 90 degree out, which will extend out from the property. So I found the standards to be confusing. Even though I don't have commercial property, there will be more commercial property as a result of these zoning changes. I would ask you to just take another look at the lighting standards and make sure that you've done everything you can do to minimize light pollution upwards and sideways and glare, not only to the harbor users, but to East Norwalk, to folks the other side of the river, on the east side of the river, if you change the zoning at the top. So those were my 3 points. I think that going back to the original one in terms of opportunity for people to work and making an attractive commercial industrial tech environment for the city of Norwalk. I was a director of software engineering at Oracle for like 23 years, and I designed optics and analytic instruments here in Norwalk for 6 years. And I've enjoyed and appreciated the city and the opportunity to work here, but I just feel that the direction is going, and I am very sympathetic to folks in terms of the need for housing and affordable housing, but people also need to work. And I can tell you, I used to be a curriculum advisor to Norwalk Community College in engineering. And prior to the .com era, there was a big change in the nature of the employment in this area. And the advice at that time was to move more towards information work and networking, which they did do, and de-emphasize manufacturing and electronics with the demise of like Norden and Sikorsky and other things that have left the city. I felt at that time that training people for electronic engineering, that sort of thing, was not the appropriate thing to do. So to bring that all the way back to the Marine and Commercial District, what I'm saying is, for all industrial districts, not just the Marine and Commercial districts, the city at this point in time should be very careful about changes to limiting the ability to manufacture, because it's becoming very unclear where technology, manufacturing, and technology jobs are going due to artificial intelligence and the advent of micro manufacturing and other very small businesses that would be possible in some of the current hodgepodge little mini industrial zones that we have within the city of Norwalk. And I know that there's some effort to develop, micro businesses, and I see, mention of 3D printers and other things, and I kind of chuckle in some of the city plans. There already was and has been a technology and defense and optics industry in Norwalk. And you want to be very careful in anything that you do that diminishes manufacturing or industrial or technology options for the city of Norwalk, because the nature of employment is changing very rapidly right now. And you want to leave your options open and not convert any possible industrial or light manufacturing or tech work to office or residential, because it might be the wrong direction to go in the future for the future of employment. Remain flexible is my advice. So I would recommend that you not approve changes to the Marine Industrial District or any industrial district for that matter at this point in time, because it's not completely clear where manufacturing and office work is going. Thank you.
Thank you. Online, Norwalk Green Association.
Hi.
Yep, go ahead.
Great, thank you. It's Brad Craighead, Norwalk Green Association. Actually, I'm speaking on behalf of being a property owner, but I am a founding member of the Norwalk Green Association. My business is called Norwalk Green Living, and I do own 6 buildings around the Norwalk Green. I did write you all a letter that I hope you've had a chance to review or will review before you complete your approvals of the various proposals for the zoning update. In particular, obviously, I'm focused on the East Avenue Village District. I don't think that there's anybody else that's really as focused on this area as I am. So I do speak. I think my voice is shared by the other key stakeholders who were present with our gratitude on the Green, which is St. Paul's First Congregational Church, Mill Hill, which is Norwalk Historical Society, and most recently the First Taxing District. But really my point here is about not density, but maintaining the appearance of open space within the East Avenue Village District and the Norwalk Green Historic District in particular. My understanding is that really the impacts in terms of the new zoning regs are related to building height and use, and I'm supportive of increasing the building height from 2.5 to 3.5 stories across of CD3, which I understand the East Avenue Village District will be a part of. That all makes sense to me, to bring more people into this part of town. There will be consequences in doing so, but I think that those consequences are good for a vibrant city center. My concern is that I want to make sure that the 20% sort of cap on lot coverage is maintained. In conversations with staff in the zoning department, my understanding is that's supposed to be addressed through the 80% impervious surface for all of CD3. I just wanted to make a suggestion that you could consider. I don't want to have a situation where lots become overbuilt and people put all of their recreational space on rooftops. So my suggestion is that you basically force any development to have recreational space at street level to maintain the appearance of more space around the buildings. I know that parking takes a huge chunk of any lot. I know the setbacks take a huge chunk of any lot. And, but I think that the recreational space can be conveniently placed almost out of view to the benefit of the public in terms of walking around. So that's my suggestion, is that you put 50% of the recreational space as a requirement at street level. In terms of the Norwalk Green Historic District, which I just made brief mention of in my letter to you all, and I just want to highlight that because I think that's something that has been largely forgotten and it is the core of the East Avenue Village District. It's probably one of Norwalk's most iconic neighborhoods. When people think of Norwalk, they probably think of the lighthouse. They might think of the green. Maybe they think of the seaport, but it's certainly one of those parts of Norwalk, maybe Mill Hill. It's one of those parts of Norwalk that people, it's a symbol. And I want to make sure that that area is respected and taken care of and carved out in terms of an overlay, or at least referenced as part of the East Avenue Village District overlay and the recreational space. Just looking it up on the web, and I need to do some work with Todd Bryant, who I know was instrumental in getting this going. They reference 54 different buildings and 3 contributing sites: the Green, Mill Hill Historic Park, and St. Paul's Place, along with St. Paul's Episcopal Church, First Congregational Church. It's a very special part of Norwalk, and I want to make sure that the Norwalk Green Historic District is somehow referred to in as the core of the East Avenue Village District. The last thing that I want to just refer to is are my comments about changing the use of, or expanding the use of, buildings within this part of town, which I think is a fabulous idea. I think at first blush, a lot of people might think that it's not helpful because it's so hard to imagine what East Avenue would be like if there were stores, if there were retail establishments, coffee shops, and so forth. Because unfortunately, East Avenue, I think inadvertently and unintentionally, when they wrote the zoning code decades ago and basically limited it to offices and residential, it's basically just become a gigantic drive-in, drive-out thoroughfare. A member of staff mentioned to me the other day that if you look at City Hall alone, the 200 to 300 people that are working there every day, there's nowhere to get lunch from City Hall. They've got to get in their cars and drive either to Wall Street, which hopefully is happening increasingly, or down to the lower part of East Avenue across 95. So I think the introduction of small scale business, of retail, of whatever the zoning regs, however the zoning regs need to be modified so that that could be done selectively and respectfully, I think makes a lot of sense. And I think would bring a vibrancy and connection to this corridor and connect it to both Wall Street and the other side of East Avenue and East Norwalk. Having said that, I think if you do in fact expand the use to other businesses beyond chiropractors, lawyers, accountants, and dentists, which is currently what the whole district is basically limited to, I think the way to actually make it work is to invest in some road infrastructure. And when I say invest in road infrastructure, I think that it would make sense for planning and zoning to lead the rezoning of this section of town, but to put some pressure on transportation, mobility, and parking to follow through with their plans to redesign this particular road stretch. I'm starting to refer to it as a gigantic traffic funnel that benefits everyone except the people that live, work, or congregate at the houses of worship that line East Avenue. Basically, the way that it's set up now with just 2 traffic lights, it's just an expressway to get from Danbury to I-95. And what was once a very prestigious part of Norwalk, East Avenue, I'd love to see it return to a tree-lined boulevard. I don't think it's a multi-million-dollar fix. I think we can start with road striping. I think, perhaps 1 traffic light could make all the difference in the world. As a point of reference, if you look at West Avenue, which has about a similar stretch between I-95 and the post office, there are 13 traffic lights along that stretch of road. I think there are 2 between I-95 and Route 1. So that's where we are. Those are my suggestions, and I think would make a huge difference to this part of Norwalk. So thank you for letting me participate in this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Georgette Worth.
Thank you for everyone's time. I appreciate it. It's been a long day and long evening and lots of information. My head is spinning. My family moved to Norwalk in 1959. My father bought Clover Manufacturing from the Gallagher estate, and Norwalk was known for its wonderful manufacturing and its diversity. And my friend Karen, who named Sono.
I'm sorry. Can we have your address, please?
Oh, I apologize. I am here regarding Cottage Street. I moved to Cottage Street in 1993.
Thank you.
I've spoken to the residents there, and they do not want the upzoning. From what I understand, it's going from a C to a CD4. It's a tiny street. I think there's 35 houses. There's no parking on the street. You can't get a fire truck by. And most importantly, there's some beautiful older homes that if it goes to 5 and 6 unit zoning, these homes will be in jeopardy. It's a very humble street. It's known for its diversity. When I first moved it, I called it the United Nations because we're all from a different country. And during 9/11, I sat on Abdul's front porch. His family's from Pakistan, and he was here earlier. So it's a wonderful community, and I'm not quite sure what the upzoning will do for this tiny little street and what the motivation is. So I'd ask you to reconsider it. 1 and 2 family zoning is enough. It's what we have right now. The parking is very difficult for the residents on the street. And I'm getting a petition. I have a page of signatures now, and I'll get the entire street in the next few days if I have to do that. Cottage Street, which is between East Avenue Extension and Osborne, just past Sweet Ashley's. Thank you for your time and all your efforts and energy.
Thank you.
Paul Fox.
Hello, I'm Paul Fox. I live on 26 Belden Avenue. I appreciate the work that the commission has been doing in opening up Norwalk to more walkable transit-oriented development. I currently live car-free in Norwalk, as do about 10% of households. But Norwalk's built environment is still largely car-centric. I would like to see more walkable transit-oriented development in Norwalk. As an example, like Cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona, where it's an entire development without any cars. It's connected transit and there's no parking, everyone is expected to walk. But currently the proposed rules wouldn't allow this kind of development due to things like parking minimums and infrontment requirements. I'd like to see the necessary reforms to allow this kind of development, as a way to allow people to live a car-free lifestyle and not have to pay some of the cost of car ownership even without owning cars, like the parking example that many people have brought up. And I'm also a member of Sustainable Streets, so I would also like to encourage the commission to read the letter that we sent and to take this into account when making decisions about parking requirements and the new zoning rules. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't tell if I apologize, I can't quite tell if it's Sabrina or Sabrine Sands, last name Sands? Okay, Sabrina. Well, I know you're not Sabrina. So.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Sebring Sands. I live 41 Wolf Avenue. I'm here tonight because housing affordability is an important issue to me. And I see zoning regulations as a big barrier to making housing more affordable. I moved to Norwalk in 2020 with my wife and our child to start physician assistant school at Sacred Heart. Because I was a student, we were living on a shoestring budget and we're lucky to find the 2-bedroom apartment we're currently living in. This year, as a 31-year-old, I finished school and started my full-time career as a PA in Greenwich. On top of that, my wife and I had our second child. We have outgrown our 2-bedroom apartment. It would make all the sense in the world for us to settle down and buy a small 3-bedroom starter house. However, even with my 6-figure income as a PA, we're nowhere able near to afford even the smallest house for sale in Norwalk currently. Most of what we found for sale were single-family detached homes for $600,000 or more. My family and I don't necessarily need a single-family detached house. As long as we have a little backyard and no upstairs neighbors, we'd be set. Smaller scale housing options like a duplex or a townhome would work great for us and be cheaper because they require less land. But there aren't many of those in Norwalk, and because of that, it's still expensive to find those and buy those, because there are lots of other people in my situation looking to do the same. When I started to see how bad this issue is, I started asking why, which led me to the subject of zoning. I learned that in most of the land around area in Norwalk, it's illegal to build these kinds of small scale housing that are inherently more affordable and still meet the needs of family like mine. I learned that lots of places where these kinds of housings are allowed in practice still don't have them because most development happens through the bureaucratic special permit process, which favors big developments and big developers over small developments and small developers. I learned about the concept of the missing middle housing, how across the country we have tons of single family homes and are building lots of large scale apartment buildings, but small scale housing formats like duplexes and townhomes are systematically missing because of zoning codes like ours. And most disappointingly, I've learned that the conversation around zoning in Norwalk is dominated by people who want to keep the kinds of small scale housing that would be affordable for my family out of their neighborhood because they're afraid it will change the character of their neighborhood. After learning that, I felt like I had to come here and say something. Housing affordability is a real problem that affects real people like me and my family. And it's caused by policies that are designed to benefit existing property owners at the expense of everyone else. I applaud the efforts of the Planning and Zoning Department and Commission to reform the zoning code to allow for small-scale housing around the city. And I'm disappointed that so many of the proposed changes that would have allowed for it were rolled back. There's one avenue that the Planning and Zoning Commission can do to use to address housing affordability, and that's parking requirements. Even when even the proposed new zoning code, duplexes and townhomes require 2 parking spots per dwelling, just to be built in the first place. As said previously, many Norwalk people who live in Norwalk, have 1 or less than 1, not necessarily need the strict 2 lot parking requirement, and it prevents a lot of development from being built in the first place. This will make more room for these developments, so families like ours, young families that want to invest and build up Norwalk to be able to do that. I encourage the Planning and Zoning Commission to revisit the high parking requirement and also consider lowering them so that Norwalk can accommodate for small scale housing and lower the ridiculously high housing costs we currently have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Myra Garcia.
Good evening. My name is Mayra Garcia.
Could you just get a little closer?
My address is 43 Bestwood Road, and I am here giving first thank you to you for your time, and I appreciate what you do for this city that I really love, and I am here to advocate for the young children. That is a crisis that all the families are having at this moment, and it's very frustrated as a provider to see the parents when I have to tell them that I don't have a space for the young children, especially for infant and toddlers. I am here in front of you to asking that please, begging to change the code or rewrite the regulations to help to these young families that I see the expression in their faces when they have to go back to work and they don't have a safe place to leave their babies. Please think about these families and rewrite the regulation and allow the large daycares in residential zones. I know it's hard for you to think about that, but you as a commissioner, as a zoning, needs to think about the community and these families that they are suffering. And it's not just this city, it's the whole state that we need to help. And I am here to advocate for them. Please think about that. Think about in that big problem that we have. And thank you for your time. And I really appreciate what you will do for the young families and the young children.
Thank you.
Courtney Austin. Do you want the microphone there?
Can we just take the microphone
Yeah,
out?
sure.
Courtney, do you want to stand? Okay. I'm afraid I'm getting worse in the last 2 months. I don't want to repeat myself from last time. And I didn't want to interfere with the number of people that had their issues. And my issues were not addressed until one speaker tonight. And that was the Norwalk Green Association. And I live at 145 East Avenue, and these rules are drastically going to affect me. I was born in Norwalk. My first home was about number 5 Fort Point Street, and that building is the only little residential house left there. I went from there to the Morrow House up on Eversley Avenue. And let me tell you, when I heard what had happened to it, I got in my car and I went up there and I sat in the driveway and I cried for 10 minutes. I was there when I was 2 years old, 3 years old. My sister was 1, 2. I have pictures standing out in the snowstorm there. My next house was Harbor View. Surprisingly, we had a summer rental down there when my sister was 2 years old and I was 6. And I went to Rowayton School, the 4-room Rowayton School, took a bus down with my caretaker. And then we were there for 2 years. And then we had to move because the house was sold. It was a rental. We were never in anything but a rental until then.
we moved to East Avenue. We moved two places in Harborview. But we moved to East Avenue in 1940 when I was 8 years old. And I have been there, my family has been in that house ever since. My children, my mother and father died in the house. My grandmother died in that house. My children went through school, finished school while we lived in that house. And when my mother died, I stayed there. And I will stay there for another 10 years, hopefully. It's dear to my heart, the house, the neighborhood. I lived on East Avenue when there were trolley tracks down the front, when there were only 2 lanes. In 1974, when I drove a school bus, I used to park my school bus in front of the house during the lunch hour. You can't believe it. I have to pull down all the shades in my rooms now in the front of the house because of the street lights. They put on high density street lights. 148 East Avenue has huge floodlights around the entrance to their 148, which is way down at the bottom of the hill. Every single doctor's office has lights on it. But the doctors aren't renting the offices anymore. There are between East Avenue Green and the Thruway, which in my house is right in the middle, there must be at least 7 apartments for rent, offices for rent. They're not renting them. The doctors are going into congregate groups. So those aren't being rented. The traffic on East Avenue is nonstop. I sat at the Green yesterday and I watched, and the lights changed. The traffic on East Avenue at 2 o'clock in the afternoon was backed all the way down East Avenue to the Jewish Center. This is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In the afternoon, past my house at 145, which is 2 houses down, the traffic is backed up. We need, somebody complained about or said there were only 2 traffic lights. We need 4. There have been 2 fatal accidents at Eversley Avenue and 1 down at the Thruway. And I myself was hit by a car coming out on the Thruway when I was walking my dogs on East Avenue. You need the traffic lights on East Avenue. And if you put this new zoning in, you're going to need them anyway. But there's going to be a continuous line all the way up East Avenue all the time. How does this affect me? I live in a big house, up on the hill, right down here. There are one of only 4 to 3 residential houses, fully residential houses, entirely on East Avenue. All of these houses on East Avenue that you see are historic. They're all 100 years old. I know because my property, the people that own my property, the Eversleys, sold those houses in 1920, and the house next to me was built in 1920. The house on the other side was built in the 1920s. So they're all 100 years old and they're all historic. So what are you going to do? Tear them all down? As your building inspector, don't tell me that that guy knew what he was doing, because I don't think he did. I went up and talked to him. He came over to console me when I was crying. And he didn't realize what he was doing, but the building inspector should have known it. I have put in application after application for zoning to the zoning department about these cars that are parked in this parking lot across the street. Which parking lot? No parking lot. It was a drop-off point for cars, and they cut a second driveway in without an application. And now there were 9 cars here parked in front of that big apartment building. 9 cars. I have been filing complaints about that since 1963 when my mother died. You can't handle the problems that you've got now with violations of zoning requirements. I am allowed in my house to have 3 parking places. That's all I have room for. If I want to put another car in front, you know what I have to do? I have to take the front porch off. You can't handle the problems that you've got with zoning and already. And I can't see that these new zoning problems are going to solve anything but, for me, anything at all. It means, as I see it, and I read through them pretty carefully, it says that they can build right up. There is no side setback. That means I can have a 3.5-story building right on either side of me. But I'm lucky. When the Eversley sold number 149 and 143, 147 and 143, they put restrictions on those property lines. You cannot build to the 6-foot line that they want to put in now. Now they want to put the building 6 feet from the street. You can't do it at 147, 145, 149 because of the property restrictions that the Eversleys had enough sense to put on. They did the same thing on Eversley Avenue when they wanted to put in number 5 Eversley Avenue. I went over to the lawyer and I said, you can't do it. You got to move it back 10 feet. Well, of course, that cut their parking place because in the back of my line, there's a 100-car parking lot. Your laws, your new rules put 6 feet frontage all the way up and down East Avenue with no side setbacks. All parking has to be at the back. Where you're going to put cuts all every 200 feet. The only parking cuts to get off of East Avenue on this side of the street are mine and the one next door, and they're together. But you can't imagine how many times people pull into those and go right straight back into the traffic because they're not going to come up the hill. You've got such a problem here until you can solve the problems in some way. You can't create more problems. And to have big buildings like the one at 140, 151, 153 that go all the way down, the parking lot in the back holds 100, 150 cars. Do you know they have a right-of-way going from Colony Place? What are you going to do? Put a cut right away going all the way up? Where are you going to do when you get to the high school or the city hall? There's no way you can cut through Eversley Avenue because there's a park there. You have so many problems now that need to be solved before you can put these rules into effect on East Avenue. That's all there is to it. You've got a church there now. The Green Association spoke of the one church. You've got another church down there. That Baptist church has no parking place at all. They all park on the street. Now you've got a dormitory across the street that only has 10 parking places. I think they cut you back. I think it's only 10 parking places for 40 kids. Don't tell me that those kids aren't going to have cars. I've seen them crossing the street to Eversley Avenue or to Lockwood Lane. They've got cars. They're told they can't have cars, but they've got cars. You can't tell a 20-year-old he can't have a car. Okay. I have a map of my property, which shows the boundary lines and everything else. When I've needed a variance, I've gone to the city and I put in variances. You know, they had to change the laws. They had to change the whole layout of their plans for 146 East Avenue because of the coastal area management. Now, how many have even mentioned coastal area management at any of these hearings? Nobody. But coastal area management, I was able to go to that meeting and I was able to say, you can't do that, it'll block my view. And what are they doing down in East Norwalk? They're blocking the view of the mill pond. I'm sorry, I'm keeping you later, but I'm coming back too. I don't think you've got another meeting. If there are so many things that are not being done here now, Norwalk is a disaster. Now, East Avenue is not going to be taken down at my house. It's going to sit there with 3.5-foot story buildings on either side of it and 100-foot frontage. It's not going to be put a 3-story building there. No way. That means that number 143 is practically a worthless property. He's unhappy now. You know he's unhappy. Number 1 and 3 are residential. When I sold those 2 houses, I made sure that they couldn't put anything bigger on it. They can't. It's one piece. I sold it as one piece, only 60 feet deep. I can't put anything else on those 2 houses. So anybody living at 145 will only have to look at 2 houses that will always be houses, not 6 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot. I'm sorry. Because now you're going to allow 3.5 story all the way up Eversley Avenue. There's one in back of me, and I know it. I had some other things, but you know, every day I don't get the hour anymore. Somebody gives it to me, but every day I look and there's something new that sounds absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. Doesn't make any sense at all. And it's going to, what are they trying to get all these ideas through before the election? They better get things straightened out first. Okay, I had a couple other things. That's enough for tonight. I'll be back on Thursday or Wednesday. Is it tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, yeah. I'll be back tomorrow night. Now for another 4 hours, gentlemen.
Is there anybody else from the public here? I think mostly everybody spoke, or is there anybody else that's attending virtually? Either see a couple phone numbers, that would be *9 to raise your hand, or the raise your hand function. Otherwise, we will be, as stated, meeting again tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. I don't see anyone, Mr. Chairman, so I think you can adjourn.
Okay, then we will close the hearing for tonight and continue it tomorrow. 6 o'clock, same location. Remind you again that anyone who's spoken this evening will not be permitted to speak again tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. No, we're not prepared to adjourn yet. We have comments of the director, Steve.
I'll email you out there.
Okay. Comments of the commissioners? All right, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. All right. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you all very much.